Hello again, I am Blunty. Now, a lot of you out there have been incessantly bugging me about a review for the Sony Xperia S Android handset, and while I'm not a man who usually bows to peer pressure or rewards that kind of childish pestering, Mum, can I have a cookie? Mum, can I have a cookie? Mum, can I have a cookie? Mum, can I have... Go get you nowhere with me. I am going to review the Sony Xperia S because it's a phone worth reviewing, because it is in fact the first Sony only Android handset that's hit the market. Sony Ericsson no longer being a thing because Sony bought out Ericsson's share of that whole cake. So here's my take on the Sony Xperia S. Here it is, Sony's first solo adventure into the wild west of Android land, the Xperia S. First thing to hit you in the face is, of course, the screen. Bright, crisp, beautiful, and sideways it has a native resolution of 1280 by 720, so any 720p video you expose your eyeballs to on it is going to look freaking fantastic. Underneath is Sony's Bravia engine software too, making things look even more vibrant and pretty. Sitting next to the iPhone 4S, its svelte body wrapped around that 4.3 inches of screen, it looks tall and slender. Its running guts consist of a 1.5 gig dual-core CPU and an Adreno 220 GPU, a gig of RAM and 32 gigs of storage on board. Nothing spectacular by today's standards, but easily enough grunt to keep most people quite happy day to day. It's currently sporting Android 2.3 or Gingerbread, but a 4.0 or Ice Cream Sandwich update will be arriving very soon. Have I mentioned recently how much I hate Android's dessert-themed code names for their Android versions? Because I do. It's very, very stupid and confusing for the end-user market. Who out there is supposed to know that Ice Cream Sandwich is a later or newer version than Gingerbread? Who knows that stuff? Just call it a number so people know what version it's at and where they're... Anyway, I'm derailing myself. Back to the review. Something that frustrated me was the buttons for home settings and back, because they aren't buttons at all, but touch-sensitive areas, marked only by a tiny dot, and they were often unresponsive if not touched in exactly the right way, or spot, or with the wind blowing a certain way, or with the right finger. I never did nail down why it simply ignored my attempts at inputs sporadically, but it did, and it was annoying. That said, those non-button buttons were, with only one other exception, which we'll hit on in a moment, pretty much the only things I didn't like. Everything else was snappy, responsive, and sensible. I'm not going to drill down in much detail about the interface, as it's pretty much the same as every other current Xperia Android phone, and I've been over it in other reviews, but suffice to say it's a pretty pleasant Android experience. Another pretty pleasant thing is a HDMI output and a dedicated camera shutter button alongside the standard volume rocker keys. The Xperia S also features a nice little design element. The buttons, which aren't buttons, don't have their own backlight beyond a barely visible pinprick of a dot for being able to see them in dark conditions, but underneath is a completely transparent bar which does light up and has the appropriate icons on it, so you can stare blindly somewhere above them hoping to hit the right spot for those tiny little touchpad button thingies. It's pretty, but it's actually quite useless. It's not even used as a notification light, which would have made sense to me, as you could have seen that even if your phone was face down, but no, it's not. Top edge, back and front, is where you'll find the cameras. The front one sucks in 1.3 megapixels and will also do 720p video, and on the back, 12.1 megapixels await you, along with 1080p video shooting. So let's look at how they perform. I've already published a video putting the Xperia S up against the iPhone 4S in a sunset shootout, and the debate on which one did better in that test rages on in the comments section. But on its own merits, it measures up somewhere between not bad and pretty damn nice. It produces a nice image with decent sharpness that's consistent across the frame. It does a pretty nice job at managing white balance in the auto setting, and the color accuracy, saturation, and contrast are all handled decently. Dynamic range isn't all that impressive though, with both the highlights and shadows losing detail pretty quickly in some more challenging situations. And it's also pretty prone to some rather ugly lens flare. Now, I occasionally like a bit of lens flare in some types of shooting I do, but this stuff simply renders the photo a completely unusable pile of poop. Delete it, it's useless. But like any camera, once you learn where its limits are, you can dance around them, or indeed with them, to get some very nice results. The macro focus mode was especially good, I found, with good sharp focus and very pleasant background blurring. The front camera, while being wildly better than most front facers, especially the miserable crap Apple jams in the front of their gear, it still isn't what I'd call great, but it's certainly okay for casual self-portraits and the like. But it's even worse with the lens flare, so be careful. In low light, the high megapixel count crammed onto that tiny sensor means you'll be getting some ugly grain and noise. This is why more megapixels isn't always better. But up against most other camera phones, it's actually pretty usable in subdued lighting. In video mode, the story is similar. The motion isn't liquid smooth, but it's pleasant enough for the kinds of duties the average camera phone gets. The same issues with dynamic range still apply, of course. I don't mind crushing the blacks a bit, but losing definition and detail in the highlights is a bit of a problem. But at least the image is crisp and clean with good colour and contrast. It's not as enriched as what the iPhone gives you, but what it misses out on in saturation, it gets back by looking a bit more natural. It has a stabilization option too, for the shaky-handed out there, and while it does make a difference, it's not dramatic. The big problem with video mode, though, is the fact that the focus can be improbably slow, and anytime you ask it to refocus on something, or worse still, it tries to do it automatically on its own whim, you're in for a good 5 to 8 seconds of unusable footage while it lethargically attempts to lock. I've seen glacial drifts that move faster than the focus mechanism on this camera. It's a little bit ridiculous. But the focus was usually well behaved, and all in all it's a decent camera worthy of sucking in quite usable video and very pleasant stills. Now, as for that front camera, which is fixed focus by the way, in video mode you'll face the same limitation as stills. It's not great at exposure metering, it's worse at dynamic range, but if you keep your face out of direct sun it does okay. All in all, considering the competition in front-facing cameras, bloody brilliant, I thought. And as you can hear for yourself, the audio's... it works. At the end of the day, the Sony Xperia S is a pretty decent Android phone. It's not king of the hill, but then again it's not supposed to be. Sony didn't make the Xperia S to be the high-end, super fancy flagship model do-everything whoop-de-doo. They made it to be a very good, affordable mid-range handset for the average person. It's quick, it's light, it has a great screen, pleasing design lines, and decent cameras. It has a couple of quirks to stub your toe on occasionally, but nothing that really outweighs the good stuff. And it's only going to get nicer when its confirmed Android 4.0 update arrives. So that's the Sony Xperia S. Thanks for watching. I am Blunty, and I will catch you next time.